Hi, I'm Victoria from Befriending Networks. This presentation I'm about to give is from our annual conference on the 1st of November, and this followed a session of peer learning and networking to discuss how we can better support staff within befriending projects. So we hope at any of our networking events, people have the opportunity to learn something from a peer or gain confidence they were doing something right. All of the discussions from conference are going to be collated to create a voice of befriending and give some guidance on what others are doing well. So you have the opportunity to learn from them that way. This is our top tips. So hopefully some good practice and things you can take on board. So our two main discussion topics for support for staff were volunteer recruitment and retainment and monitoring and evaluation, both known to be timely processes for staff. But let's see if our suggestions can support you to be efficient with your own time. So as discussed earlier this morning, we are hopefully managing to keep our longer serving volunteers engaged and active. For those that were not at conference, please see our other video on top tips for volunteers. If you have a busy workload, it's easy to fall into a habit of thinking no news is good news with your volunteers. But rather than make your communication and support reactive, we recommend that you are proactive. So as we discussed, in our volunteer top tips, we are hopefully managing to keep our longer serving volunteers engaged and active. So electronic calendars can be heroes when juggling and spinning those ever-growing pile of plates. I would be absolutely lost without my calendar. It's color-coded, it gives me notifications, it keeps my work life in order. We recommend you utilize yours and be efficient with your time. Set reminders as and when. For example, when a new volunteer starts and you're processing their application form and paperwork, add their birthday to your calendar to remind you to send an email on that day to wish them a happy birthday and to thank them for their volunteering. Recognize them. Or set reminders with repetition to make it clear when to check in on a volunteer. So here's an example of just that on the screen. I've set up a notification to go at 9:30 a.m. when I start work on a Tuesday every 8 weeks. This is reminding me to send my well-being check once every 2 months to all volunteers. It shows I care. It's not overflowing them with communication. It's just telling them that I'm open to talk, to show I'm here and I value them as a person, not just for what they do for my service users. Personally, I have quit volunteering roles in the past where I felt like a cog in a machine that was unseen and unheard. So value your volunteers and make it clear to improve their sustainability with your project. We want to retain them as long as they are willing. There are different ways our volunteers can build support within the organization outside of one-to-one meetings with staff members. We have peer support, so let volunteers meet at training. To increase the chances of volunteers meeting one another, why not initiate a training schedule for staff? For example, volunteer training running the first week of every month. This enforces a grouping of volunteers and allows more opportunity to gain peer support. More discussion and opinions could also make your training much more enjoyable, giving a stronger first impression to your volunteers. There's also group event support. So invite volunteers to attend events that allow the volunteer to socialize, to feel part of the community. So for example, this could be additional training and upskilling, but it could also be celebration events such as Befriending Week or Volunteer Week. There's also virtual support. So volunteer support sessions became a common feature for community-based projects during the pandemic. Why stop there? Virtual support from peers and staff allow a sharing of experience, a sense of unity forming due to the common ground discovered. Many projects use things such as Zoom sessions or Facebook groups or Slack channels, whatever best works for them. There are also well-being checks. So as highlighted in the last slide, well-being is important. Volunteers' well-being needs to be protected. Working with vulnerable groups can create the opportunity for concern, stress, or pushed boundaries. All constrain a volunteer and their enjoyment of the role and negatively affect our ability to retain them. Well-being checks can happen through phone calls, emails, face-to-face meeting, video calls, and all the other options. but it could also be from requests from volunteers themselves. Having a variety of options will allow for the flexibility required or for the preference of the volunteer, again, showing that we value them and what they need. There are many different ways to show care and compassion for our volunteers and to recognise their efforts and make them feel like a valued member of your team. It is all about working out what is best for you and your project. And the same goes for volunteer recruitment. There are numerous ways to recruit volunteers. For example, we could use local resources such as community radio stations or volunteer hubs. We could use events such as this week, Befriending Week, November 1st to 7th, to join our social media campaign and market your project, publish case studies and showcase your impact with a bid to attract new volunteers. We can craft our own recruitment message through our social media or by utilizing your membership. Hopefully you're all aware that if you Google Befriending, our directory is a top result. And on our website, as a member, you don't only advertise what your project is, you can also advertise for volunteers. There are also print methods such as leaflets and flyers, bulletin boards, or newspapers, to name just a few. But how do we choose? How do we know what is worth our time and effort? How can we be efficient on volunteer recruitment? To know we're being efficient, we need to be monitoring and evaluating our impact. Every befriending service is different, and every service operates in a different context. How to reach the right people is a long process of learning, and it needs to be tailored to the needs of your service and your area. So here is just one example of how we can monitor our recruitment process and evaluate what is working and what needs to be improved. Questions we could ask. 1, where did your potential volunteer hear about you? Find out what marketing is successful and where you're creating your reputation. This is important. For both large teams and those small teams that I know are represented within our membership, those projects where you may have the title of volunteer coordinator, but you're also safeguarding officer, the marketing team, finance and fundraising, and the many roles in between. If you are juggling a lot of responsibility, let's make sure your time spent on recruitment is time well spent. So by monitoring which methods are bringing in volunteer traffic, you will know where to direct your efforts. For example, if social media is giving you no new volunteers, you either need to rethink your approach and communication style, or consider focusing recruitment marketing through a different resource. Another question we can ask is, have they volunteered before, or is your project inspiring them to engage with the community? This can be a great statistic to monitor for demonstrating community connection. Many of you claim your project creates community connection, and this does not need to be solely backed up by service users. Many studies show that volunteering improves the volunteers' well-being as well. So it can also be your volunteers which are creating this outcome, and their engagement can be its own key performance indicator that you're achieving community connection through your project. Age group is also a great factor to monitor and evaluate during the recruitment process. By knowing which age group a volunteer belongs to and how they came to apply, we can help identify if our target audience is better reached through one form of marketing traffic. This can also address if certain medias work for a wider reach. What is their motivation for applying to be a volunteer is another question we can ask. Application motivation can help you better understand your community too. There are many reasons why someone may wish to volunteer. On the screen are just a few examples. So why is this helpful information? It may demonstrate your target audience or wider audience. If you find there is one key answer dominating your results, consider why this is. It may be down to language in your marketing materials. You may state something like, give back to your community and volunteer, which is why those who wish to be part of the community, so category G, are drawn to your volunteering opportunity. It also highlights the expectations the volunteer may have. If they are here for the experience of one-to-one work, they may have career goals that you are helping them with. Perhaps ask them what training topics they expect or would benefit from before explaining the induction training process. This can make the volunteer feel recognized, retain their interest, and retain the volunteer as they have built rapport and have felt supported by staff from day one. My last example, monitoring what is unsuccessful. You may never come across this. I know many of you are desperate for volunteers, so me suggesting you say no to someone might seem like madness, but inappropriate volunteer applications can exist. Here are just some examples on the screen of why we may have to say goodbye to an applicant. For example, was unaware of time commitments, or did not understand the objectives and aims, or perhaps are better suited for an alternative project. So just with those questions and trackers I've gone through, here on the screen is an example of how we could pull that together. Now, this could be done on a CRM system or just a free Excel account. So we have in the first column, the names, then we have the date of application, age, volunteer before, yes or no, did they get an interview, yes or no, the date of interview, whether it was successful, the reason it was unsuccessful, reason for applying, where did they hear about us, their start date, and any additional notes. So what can we see from these 4 applicants? Well, firstly, we have 2 in the 28 to 35-year-old category. So in the age bracket, that is C. They both responded to social media advertisements, which in that category is A, suggesting that social media works for this age group. But as you can see, John Smith, he was unsuccessful with his application due to unwilling to do training as part of the recruitment process. Now, this suggests we need to check our marketing materials. Was this not clear? They heard about our project from social prescribers or link workers, so perhaps they are misadvertising, and perhaps we need to schedule a meeting with them to make sure that they know exactly what our project does and offers. We also know that we have had 3 volunteer applications in May, which is a 100% successful rate. Support and supervisions now need to be scheduled in my diary for August or September, so 3 months from now. So in good practice, we recommend one-to-ones happen once every 6 months minimum, but ideally every three months. So they joined in May. So in August or September, I would like to meet with Jane, Adam, and Bobby. So to make sure I don't forget about them or make them feel disvalued, I'll schedule that reminder now in my diary to ensure no volunteer feels unrecognised or underappreciated. So that is just one example of how monitoring and evaluation applies to befriending in one tiny section of our project's operations. So to summarize, by better understanding our volunteers and how we recruited them, we can highlight how better to retain them. Now, the process of monitoring and evaluating a service, the process of understanding what is working and what is not working, it should not fall on one person. It requires input from a number of different stakeholders, from our referrers giving us initial data or baselines, trustees who give us governance and accountability, third parties such as carers or family who can give observations of impact, and our most common components on the screen, as you can see, volunteer, the coordinator, and the service user. Now, on the screen are just a couple suggestions of how these 3 roles can participate in the monitoring and evaluation of a project and its objectives. Trust me, there are many more opportunities, but for today, I wanted to give you some food for thought. So just in case anyone cannot read the screen, the volunteer, for example, can complete any surveys that are given out. Our volunteer coordinator can monitor environmental impact by speaking to groups within community and community teams and social prescribers. Do they have data that we could benefit from? Our service user could participate in volunteer week or befriending week and share their experience so that we can have a case study to show the impact our volunteers are having on the community. So lastly, here are some top tips on monitoring and evaluation. This is a subject that as a training course, I could happily dedicate hours and hours to, but to give you some ideas, I recommend that you set up a simple user-friendly system for storing information. Keep it updated and backed up. Make it very clear to your volunteers why you are collecting information from them during recruitment and onwards and what you are doing with it. Ensure to get permission to store data. Pull together the evidence as you go along. It's far too easy to realize a week before a report is due that you need it. Save yourself time and pick away at it bit by bit. Use your outcomes as a reference point when analyzing information. Give yourself regular time to do it. Schedule in team or board meetings every 6 months to assess how much the project is achieving and pick up any problems. and have a clear theory of change and monitoring and evaluation system. And lastly, make sure it's a team effort. Use your team meetings to have an open conversation about what works well and what does not. So, in summary, for this segment, do use technology to your advantage. Focus on time management and schedule reminders and events in advance rather than an afterthought. Offer variety when giving support to volunteers, as one size does not fit all. Do monitor what works and change what does not, whether it's something creative or innovative or just trying an alternative. Embed evaluation throughout the volunteer pathway and make sure it's a team effort. All the content from the segment was taken from a variety of courses, as can be seen on the screen. If you would like to know anything more, I'm happy to answer questions, and my email address is victoria@befriending.co.uk.